Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hey YouTube, our guest was having some connection issues today, so we're keeping it audio only for this episode. No video this time, just pop in your earbuds and enjoy the listen. Today, thousands have been forced to flee displacement camps in Sudan.
Sudan's rapid support forces are now claiming that they have taken control of a famine-hit displacement camp called Zamzam in the western Darfur region.
The Sudanese army says Khartoum is free, but as fighting shifts to Darfur, the humanitarian crisis only appears to be deepening. I'm Manuel Rapalo, and this is The Take.
My name is Hiba Morgan. I'm a journalist, a correspondent with Al Jazeera English covering Sudan.
Hiba, thank you so much for joining us today on The Take. It's been 2 years since Sudan's civil war began, with brutal fighting taking place between Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, and the Sudanese army, tearing through the country. Now, Khartoum has been declared free, but what does this mean militarily? Are Sudanese armed forces in full control of the capital?
Well, when that announcement was made by the head of the army, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, that was in late March, when the army was able to take over the presidential palace and the international airport, which were one of the first places and locations that the Rapid Support Forces took control of on April 15th, 2023. And the fact that they're very close to the general command of the army, the fact that, the presidential palace has always been the symbol of sovereignty of Sudan. For the army to be able to retake control of that, it effectively meant that they've retaken the capital. But in reality, there are still parts in the capital, in Khartoum, specifically in South and West Omdurman, that the army is not fully in control of. So you have, for example, in South Omdurman, in the further south part of Omdurman, there's a place called Salha, which still has RSF fighters in it. There is Umbedda, which is a very large residential district where the Rapid Support Forces still have fighters. And it's from that part of the capital that RSF words into Bara and then into Darfur. So when they were retreating, they ensured that they had fighters that basically served as a buffer zone between the retreating fighters and those that are and the Sudanese army. So these fighters in South and West Omdurman are still very much there. The army has been, since making that announcement, gaining a few more streets, inching towards taking full control. But the reality is, yes, they have the upper hand. They're more dominating now than they were when the war started and the RSF was all over the place. When the RSF controlled the airport, the central bank headquarters, the presidential palace, the major refinery here in Khartoum, all of that is now under the control of the army. But the army is in a position where, they can decide that they want to move slow, they want to move fast against the Rapid Support Forces because they're no longer under siege. They can reinforce their troops. They can move freely around the capital and most parts of the capital.
From what you've seen and heard, Hiba, how are civilians in Khartoum reacting to the advance of Sudan's armed forces?
Well, when it's become a common scene where, when the army comes in, you see civilians taking to the streets, celebrating, singing, dancing. And when you ask many of them why, the answer is more or less similar. It's because when the RSF were around, they couldn't roam freely. The RSF set so much checkpoints on the roads, on main roads, that people couldn't move without their IDs. And even if they did have IDs, they got harassed. So for people, when they see the army now in control, they start celebrating. They know that these checkpoints that used to harass them is no longer there, that traders can come in because they're not going to be stopped at checkpoints. Their goods will not be taken by the Rapid Support Forces. They will not be asked to pay money to be able to go from one checkpoint to another until they reach their businesses to be able to sell to people. So that means food commodities, basic commodities, market commodities are going to come down. And this is something we've heard from so many people in various parts of Khartoum, whether it's in Khartoum North, whether it's in East Nile, whether it's in Khartoum City and Omdurman. They keep saying that, with the army in, again, these are the people who stayed behind and who've lived under the RSF for the past 2 years. They talked about how the rapid support forces entered their homes, looted the homes, harassed people, beat the residents that stayed there. They've been without water and power for 2 years in network connection unless they go to specific places. And usually it's at a risk just to be able to listen to news from their families or give news to their families that they're still alive. So when you look at the situation that they've been living at in the past 2 years and how they've been living in the past 2 years, you understand why people take to the streets and start celebrating, why you hear all these cries of joys and the children on the street. Because for them, it's a respite from what they've been living and what they've been going through. Because these displaced people, those people who left Khartoum, they've always been in limbo. They didn't know where to go. You stay in a displacement camp and it's not comfortable. Your children don't get education. You don't have proper access to healthcare, very little food assistance coming in. If you try to rent on your own, rent has been very expensive for so many people, unaffordable because people didn't have jobs. We've been hearing that it's a chance, to go back to what they've left. They left their lives.
The Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, reportedly killed more than 400 people at the Zamzam and Abu Sharouk displacement camps and the city of El Fasher on Friday and Saturday. This was actually a 4-day attack. What's the situation like now?
So the situation in Zamzam right now is that it no longer is home to many, many people who have been there for decades. And I know the conflict started in April 2023, but many people have been there since April 2004, and that's after the start of the Darfur War in 2003. These are people who fled their villages because their villages have been burned to the ground by the RSF's precursor, the Janjaweed, and the border guards. In fact, we met some of these displaced people just 2 months before the conflict started. We spoke to so many of them, and they said they cannot go home because their homes, their villages have been burned to the ground. They're still aware that the RSF fighters are outside harassing them, assaulting them, preventing them from going back to their villages, preventing them from being able to farm. So they don't have any means of livelihood. That's why they were stuck in Zamzam camp in El Fasher. And this is all stories we heard before the conflict started. Now, over a period of 4 days, the Rapid Support Forces launched artillery attacks, drone attacks, and direct ground assault on the displacement camp. They kept claiming that it is military base, but we've been to El Fasher and we've been to Zamzam so many times. And we've spoken to displaced people. These are people who could not go home. And now they're once again being forced to flee from this camp that, to begin with, had very, very little resources. Getting drinking water was an issue. Food commodities were running low. Aid organizations were not providing, adequate amount of assistance even before the conflict. When the conflict came, getting humanitarian assistance to those people had become even harder. Then they had the RSF coming in, raiding them, attacking them, setting those settlements and homes on fire, and claiming that they're doing that because they believe that they're fighters in the camp, when these are people, again, that have been displaced by their precursors, the Janjaweed. The camp has been surrounded by the RSF on all sides. People tried to leave the camp and took a risk doing that to get to the city of El Fasher, which is already facing another dire humanitarian situation on its own, or to an area called Tawila, because that's where the RSF said, if you go there, we're going to provide you a safe corridor. So thousands of people have left the camp. Many homes, many settlements burnt because, of the RSF attack. Now the RSF is in control of the camp. So many people don't feel like they can actually go back. They know that this means that, the RSF will suspect them of being allied to the government, allied to the army. And they don't want that. And besides, again, they've already seen the RSF. They've seen the RSF when it was born, when it was created. They know what the RSF is. They don't want to take the risk of being there with those fighters that displaced them in 2003, 2004, and believe that this time around, 22 years later or 23 years later, it's going to be any different.
Hiba, Sudan filed a case at the International Court of Justice on March 6th of this year, accusing the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, of aiding the RSF in committing genocide against the Masalid people in West Darfur. What more can you tell us about this case that's now at the International Court of Justice?
So to talk about this case, we have to go back more than a year ago at the start of the conflict, more than a year and a half ago, in June, July, when the Rapid Support Forces started attacking the city of Jenaina in West Darfur. And they were very bold about it. They would broadcast and they would put out videos of them attacking villages, attacking districts in Jenaina city that were that was housing Masalit. They would go to door, house to house, targeting the Masalit people, killing them. And we heard from so many neighbors in Chad that, especially male relatives have been targeted, have been killed. We've heard from survivors that they're the backbone of the case that the Sudanese government filed against the United Arab Emirates in the International Court of Justice, that the RSF, its allied fighters and its allied forces, would not have been able to do that if they did not have a steady supply of weapons from the United Arab Emirates. Therefore, the United Arab Emirates, or the UAE, is complicit. That was what the Sudanese government was accusing the UAE of supporting the Rapid Support Forces, giving them the power to be able to commit this kind of atrocities that happened in Jenaina and against the Masalit and other places such as Ardamata in West Darfur. Then the court did release a press statement saying that they will be deliberating on the Sudanese government's petition and will issue its ruling on whether Sudan has a point or not. Well, it's not just coming down to, the government accusing the UAE of genocide or being complicit in the genocide against the Masalit in West Darfur. Basically, what the Sudanese government is saying is that you were able to be Rapid Support Forces support. You're the reason, the UAE, you're the reason why this conflict has gone on for so long. Your continuous support, and the government used evidence based on UN reports, based on journalists' reports, that there has been flights from the UAE to Chad into Darfur, which is very much an RSF stronghold. Now, the United Arab Emirates said that's not what they're doing, that this is not part of that they basically did give support to the Rapid Support Forces prior to the conflict, but after the conflict, they have not been doing that. They've been providing humanitarian aid. So it's obviously up for dispute. And now the Sudanese government is saying, the reason why it took us so long to retake Khartoum and from the Rapid Support Forces, to retake so many areas in the central parts of the country from the Rapid Support Forces, the reason why our major stronghold in Al-Fashir is being attacked by the Rapid Support Forces in Darfur is because this support that you're providing just keeps on and on and on going. So you are complicit in this conflict. And if it's not for your support, the UAE support, then this conflict would have been over a long time ago.
And Hiba, you've been covering this war for the last 2 years. You've lived through so much of this in such a personal way. Your own home was caught in the middle of all of this. What has it meant for you to report on a war that's reshaped your own life?
There are times where it has been hard. I'm not going to lie about it. There are times where, you always think, it's just a job, that this is something that we do because we have to do, and you don't try to take it personal. But when it's your family that's being displaced, when it's your home, your family home that has been destroyed and that you're forced from, when it's your friends that no longer, stay in the country, or that they no longer feel safe here or have lost so much, whether it's, a friend who had to leave her home and go to another city and then eventually go to another country and then has to struggle with living there because now they have to figure out rent, they have to figure out their children in school. It's just that hearing all these stories, you can't not take it personal, There are times where, you try to distance yourself just to get the job done. But at the end of the day, it gets to you. You realize that it's not something you talk about for other people to just listen and reflect and try to act on it. It's something that is affecting you too. It's given me so much understanding, I guess, in terms of how people deal with each other, how people deal with conflicts, how resilient they can be, and at the same time, how vulnerable they can be. including myself. But it has been heartbreaking. It has had its ups and downs. There are moments where, we celebrated personal victories, we celebrated little wins on a personal level. But the negative, I would say, has been much, much more. There were days where you just don't know if you're going to wake up the next morning because of the amount of artillery fire that you hear overnight. When you come out and you wake up the next morning, you're grateful. You're thankful that you're able to make it another day, another battle that you can face, go to work and do what you need to do. But at the end of the day, you realize that there is a part of you that is trying to pull it together, trying to just breathe, trying to survive. And it's not just me, by the way. I would say I'm probably part of the lucky ones. I don't have to worry about where I'm going to get my food from. I don't have to worry about whether I have a roof over my head. I don't have to worry about so many things. And it still gets to me. So I can imagine, or I really can't, to be honest. I can't imagine how they're living, to be honest. They can tell us about it. We can cry with them. We can have our moments with them. But this is how we are handling this conflict and how it's getting to us. I don't want to imagine how a mother who is in a camp with her children, 4 children, and she hasn't had a food for 2 days because whatever she gets, she has to give to her children.
How much hope do you have that this war will end and that you'll get a chance to have a normal life again?
The thing about this war and me, I think there's always this choice of you can walk away. I'm here partly because of the job. I can go elsewhere, restart my life. It will be a bit hard, yes, or maybe very hard, but not impossible. There are people who can't. This war is very much entwined with them. They can't. There's nowhere for them to go. There's no other life. So where this is going right now, from the way I see it, now that the RSF has been largely pushed out of Khartoum, is that this war is moving from the capital, from the center, towards the western part of the country in the southwest, the peripheries again. And if you look at Sudan's history, basically, wars in the peripheries don't end in overnight. They don't end in a year or 2. They end in decades. Eventually, the warring sides reach some kind of compromise that is satisfactory to both parties. But this is where the conflict is heading to. It's slowly, gradually moving from the capital towards the western part of the country. What this means is that people in the West can't escape from it. Whether you're displaced and you can't go home, that's because of the conflict. Whether you're staying in an entire humanitarian situation in Darfur, that's because of the conflict. Whether you're in a position of power, that's because of the conflict. All of that, you just can't escape it. You can't. So I'd like to say, I want to continue covering Sudan. I want to be able to continue reflecting people's voices. And I think it would be irresponsible of all of us, not just as journalists, but as human beings of this world, as people who have once upon a time, rallied, protested for Darfur, to just turn our backs, for lawmakers anywhere, whether it's in Sudan or outside, to just act like it's not happening. Yes, it's been there for a while, there is fatigue, but it does not deserve to be forgotten or abandoned. So I'm not going to abandon it.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Khaled Soltan, Sonia Baghat, Tamara Khandaker, with Phillip Lanos, Spencer Cline, Sarí el-Khalili, Marcos Bartolme, Mariana Navarrete, Kisaa Zehra, Remas AlHawari, and me, Manuel Rapalo. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Our video editors are Hisham Abu Salah and Mohamed Al-Melhem. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer. Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.